You're listening to WPPM LP in Philadelphia.
You're listening to WPPM, People Powered Media. WPPM is a project of PhillyCam, a community media center in Philadelphia. WPPM is a member-supported participatory community station, rehumanizing radio with local voices and original programming. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member of PhillyCam and getting involved in our community radio station, visit our website at www.phillycam.org. Thanks for listening.
Hello, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and you're watching and listening to the People Power Lunch Hour Show here at PhillyCam. On today's show, we're going to be featuring important information about the 2020 census. In the first half of the show, we'll be featuring a census champion training video that took place here at PhillyCam just last night. This is an in-depth training to become a census champion, a trusted messenger equipped with the knowledge and tools to accurately and effectively answer questions and raise awareness about the 2020 census. Census champions will become part of a team that will share critical information to educate the public about the census through a grassroots, neighbor-to-neighbor strategy. So we'll watch a great video from the training last night, and later on in the show, we'll talk with a representative from the organization Keystone Counts, talk about what they'll be doing here locally in Philadelphia to get people counted. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll be right back.
What do you need to know? So what do you guys think, and again, I'm talking to the Facebook audience that may or may not be there. What do you guys think the census is? You hear the word census, it's obviously something very important, otherwise we wouldn't be here tonight. But there's a lot of different, I think, definitions and ideals and perceptions of it. So the definition is the United States Census is a national survey conducted every 10 years by the U.S. Census Bureau to count the population and to gather information about how the country is changing. So censuses have been conducted by countries all throughout the world since the 16th century. They've been part of our country's history since 1790, and this year is going to mark our 24th census. I don't know about anyone else, but I remember doing the census 10 years ago and getting that giant phone book package in the mail. I was the responsible roommate, so I filled it out for my household at the time. But in 2020, it's completely changed. We're going to do a short form questionnaire with just 9 questions. So that's a real game changer as far as making sure that everybody has the time and accessibility to be counted. I want to take a moment to clarify that the U.S. Census Bureau, they're the ones that execute the census. So I'm here tonight as a volunteer with Philly Counts, but really the Census Bureau, they're responsible for hiring the enumerators, also known as the counters. They print the forms, they collect the data. We're not in charge of any of that. We're really held responsible for supporting the Census Bureau in this work to make sure that Philly is counted accurately. So we're helping promote it, we're marketing the census, we're working with different communities to make sure that people have resources they need and that the census is accessible. And so I just wanted to differentiate those two. So you should also know that completing the census is required by law. We can get into why the census is important. It's much more than just a head count. It's actually responsible for the impact on Philadelphia for the next 10 years. So census data is determined to use representation in Congress and There we go. It's representation in Congress. Donald's on it for me, off to the side there. Thank you, Donald. The disbursement of federal funds and is used for research, both publicly and privately. So there's a lot of things that the census data is reliant on. And that is why it's so important. You're going to hear me say this, 20 times within this presentation, if not more, that we do not want to have an undercount. So an undercount is when fewer than the actual numbers. Oh, we're going back to the video. So the undercount, I'll just let that happen behind me. So the undercount is when fewer than actual number of people are recorded in the census. An undercount means federal programs and representations are allocated for a smaller number of people that live in our city. So in order for us to get funding and resources and services for our citizens and for our residents, we need to make sure that we have an accurate number of how many people need to be served. And there's so many ways that an undercount can affect different programs. Medical assistance programs, Medicare Part B, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, school lunch programs. I mean, you hear in the news about kids that have school lunch debt. School lunch programs on a federal level can resolve that. Special education grants. The highways, so here in Philly, 76, 95, 476, 676 will all be affected by the number of estimated users of those highways. Section 8 housing, federal grants, AmeriCorps Vista, community block grants, foster care. I mean, there's a number of things. The list goes on and on. So we really want to make sure that we're doing our best job to not be undercounted so we have an accurate number. The way I like to think about it is just say, as for example, if the sidewalks were funded by the census, you need to know if you have 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 people using those sidewalks, so you can estimate how much repairs you'll need, how much cleaning you'll need. So think about it in that way. So let's talk about all the ways the data census affects Philadelphia. So census data helps us see how the country is changing and how everyone uses it. Local governments, businesses, researchers, and nonprofits. So those are all major sectors that are, or buckets, I guess you could say, that are affected by the census. So I'm gonna walk through each one very briefly to give you an example of how it's affected. So if you start with Philadelphia, Philadelphia benefits when the census counts everybody, right? So thinking of the sidewalk example that I used, that's something to keep in mind. Federal programs disperse grants that support communities based on population totals and breakdowns by sex, age, and race. Residents use the census to support community initiatives involving legislation, quality of life, and consumer advocacy. Businesses use census data to decide where to open new stores, factories, offices, and then that in turn creates new jobs, right? Local government officials use the census to ensure public safety and plan new schools and hospitals. And then nonprofit organizations use census data to learn where and how to best serve their constituencies. So just reiterating the fact of how important the census is and how it affects so many different areas of our day-to-day. And if you're at home in front of your computer and want to share how the census and the programs we listed and the different sectors and buckets that it affects will change your day-to-day, it would be great to hear different ways that you at home would be affected by this data. And certainly understanding the significance of an undercount versus an accurate count. So that's like the big overview. The census day is April 1st. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening before that, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening afterwards. But when you hear about Census Day, you want to remember April 1st. This is not an April Fool's joke, I promise you, okay? I thought that was like a little confusing that was the day they picked, but it is what it is. It is a serious Census Day. So we'll look at the timeline. The U.S. Census Bureau will begin their outreach on March 12th, and they will finish in July 2020. This is what you'll receive in the mail. So remember, we're getting rid of that giant phone book package, and we're going totally new century here. So by April 1st, 2020, households will receive an invitation via U.S. mail to participate in the census. So the first thing you'll get in the mail is an invitation to participate. In 2020, for the first time in history, people can respond to the census online. That's going to be a major game changer, but it's also going to prevent some barriers and challenges too, and we'll get into all of that. People can also respond over the phone. So if you don't want to do it by mail, you don't want to do it online, you can do it by the phone. You can do a paper form and mail it in through the U.S. Postal Service, like traditionally, or you can do it in person with the census counter. Census takers or counters or enumerators, they'll visit households if you have not completed the census on any of the other ways. So if you haven't done it online, by mail, or by phone, their job is to help you complete the census. Okay, so let's talk about language access, right? Because that's incredibly important, of course, across the country, but especially here in Philadelphia. If you do not speak English, you can respond to the census online or by phone in 12 different languages: Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. So those are the 12 languages that you can respond to the census to online or by the phone. However, there will be language assistant cards available through the census takers or the census counters in up to about 59 different languages. So these cards, they will not be exact translations, but they'll be as instructions, translated instructions on how to fill out the form. And that's just like an incredible and impressive number, so I'm super excited about that. The paper form will be available in English and bilingual English-Spanish. Spanish-only forms will be available in Puerto Rico. It's also important to know that they'll have online and print versions for Braille, and then there'll be an online ASL, American Sign Language version, for the video online too. So lots of different ways to access it, which is, like I said, it's incredibly exciting and inclusive, so we feel really good about that. So this is what you will receive in the mail, and this is the timeline. So you will receive, and this will kind of backtrack what we talked about a little bit. You'll receive an invitation or postcard in the mail. From March 12th to 20th, 2020, you'll receive via U.S. mail an invitation to complete the 2020 census online. That is the preferred way, and we'll talk about what that means and what that looks like. From March 16th to 24th, you will receive a reminder letter. And then from March 26th to April 3rd, you will receive an additional reminder letter if you haven't responded yet. If you have responded within a timely fashion, then you should be good to go. Okay. April 8th through 16th, you'll receive a reminder letter alongside a paper questionnaire. And then April 20th to 27th, you'll receive a reminder letter before a taker or a number counter comes for a visit. So if you don't want someone to come to your house, fill it out in these other ways. If you do, if you prefer that way and you want someone to help you, that seems to be about the time frame that they'll come by. After the fifth and final mailer, an enumerator will visit your residence to offer assistance. So that will have you covered there. So households will receive several reminders in many different formats in a short period of time. So you'll hopefully get like a very visual picture of the census, how to access it, and when it's due. All right, so let's take a look at what the actual form looks like. So here it is on the screen. Here it is. Here's another. I don't know if it's better to see it on the screen, or you can just see like a printout copy here. For those of you that are attending in person or have attended in person, this is in your folder. The 2020 census, as we mentioned, has only 9 questions, and it's going to collect basic information about your household and the people living in it. How many people are living in your house on April 1st? So again, going back to that April 1st date, why it's so important. When you fill out the census, you want to think about what your situation is, what your living situation is, where you're living, who's living with you on that exact date. So if you're moving on April 2nd, you want to think about where you are on April 1st. You'll be asked whether your home is owned or rented, and then you'll be asked about gender, race, age, ethnic group, and relationship. And everyone in your house will be asked these questions. So if you have 6 people in your house, This form will be filled out 6 different times, but together you'll have one submission as one household. The census asks for people's names only to ensure that each household member is counted only once. Names help census workers to remove extra records, so you don't want to be double counted. So that's why they are going to ask for your name on the census sheet. And answering all questions on average should take about 10 minutes, give or take, depending on how many people you have in your household. So that's the basics for what the census actually is and what the questions are. Do you have to answer all census questions? I mean, you should. We'd like you to. Everyone is encouraged to fill out the census completely. If you don't fill out all the questions, your form still will be valid, but it's possible that somebody will still come to your door in that later time frame to have you finish it. Because again, it is going to be really important that we have a complete count and all those areas are accurately filled out. So we really do encourage you, if you're already sitting down and you're going to fill out the first 3 questions, just finish it and complete the 9 if you can. And then this is a really important slide as well. So there's been a lot of conversation about, will there be a citizenship question on the census? The answer is no. So you will not be asked your citizenship status. I think that's an important message to get spread out, because people hear, over the summer there was a lawsuit and people may not know where that landed. We want to make sure that this is a comfortable and trusting process. So make sure that this message gets spread. There will not be a citizenship status question on the census. So that's it. That's not it actually, but that's it for this section, I should say. So Census Day is April 1st. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out the form, and an undercount is when fewer than the actual number of people are counted. And so that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid an undercount, and that's why census champions, like all of you, are so important. So we're going to kind of move, I didn't realize that was an animation. So there you go. You already knew the answer. All right. So section 2, data security, privacy, and confidentiality. This is another incredibly important part of sharing information about the census, because you want to make sure that it's a trustful and comfortable situation. It is understandable that some people feel weary about giving out their family's personal information to anyone, right? Whether it be the census or credit cards or people over the phone, including the federal government, right? So that's a very real and understandable hesitation. However, you should know that the data collected by the U.S. Census Bureau it's confidential, it's secure, and it is protected by the U.S. Constitution. And I'll be very specific about this. So Title 13, which is the same law that requires you to fill out the census, also protects your data. The data collected by the census has to remain anonymous, and it's used for statistical purposes only. So unlike law and order, this information cannot be used against you in a court of law. And there you have a picture of law and order up there. So there you go. How does the U.S. Census Bureau use the data collected? I think this is a big misconception too, right? So the government's collecting all this data. What do they actually do with it, right? It's used only for statistical purposes. Group household responses are used to paint a picture of the community demographics. They want to know where people are, what type of people are there, what type of services could they possibly use and benefit from. As mentioned, the census data is protected, again, by Title 13. That's important to remind people. It cannot be used against any person by any government agency or court. No one can access individual responses. And I'm going to repeat that. No one can access individual responses. It's incredibly important. No law enforcement agencies can access this information. So DHS, ICE, FBI, CIA, no one can access this. And I think that's another important message to put through, so people do feel safe and comfortable, and we make sure that everybody's counted. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that was a concern, because I remember many years ago when I was younger, that we wouldn't answer this census because we didn't know how important it was.
Yes.
We thought that, the government was trying to get into our business and it would be something negative against us.
No.
We didn't know there was actually something positive for our community.
Yeah, and so that's why organizations like Philly Counts and volunteers across the city, that's why we're making such a big deal about this right now, because there is that misconception and there is that mistrust. I think I forget what the exact statistic is, but distrust in the government is at its highest right now. And so we want to make sure that we're changing that narrative and we're making people see the benefits, because we really do need to have everybody counted. So yeah, so that's great that you're here tonight and can kind of bring this information back to your friends and neighbors. Yeah. So I will share that while the information is protected, I want to be clear and transparent. The U.S. Census Bureau is required to keep your information confidential for 72 years. It can't release identifiable information to any individual, but it does have that 72-year mark, right? But when it is released, it's released to the National Archives and Records for Administration. And an example of the time frame of when you fill out the census to when this information could be released, in 1940, the 1940 census was just released in 2012. The 1950 census will be released in 2022. So there is that big time frame, and the information that you're collecting, you're not putting your social security number on it. It is more about demographics and who you are and who you're representing in your community. But I just wanted to make that point. So do you know who has access to the census data? So the U.S. Census Bureau, they manage all of the data. But even so, the U.S. Census Bureau employees, they take a lifetime oath of non-disclosure that protects your answers, because they have to remain confidential. Punishment for mishandling data is up to $250,000 in a fine and up to 5 years in federal prison. So they put forth pretty serious consequences for the people that are physically handling the data and aggregating it. The U.S. Census Bureau will produce a summary report which presents an analysis of the data collected in the 2020 census. Individual households will not be identified based on the responses. Again, this is all aggregating and collecting information and analyzing it in an anonymous way. So that's important to know, and these talking points will come up as you're going out into your communities and into your neighborhoods. So this stuff is important to have these talking points as these questions arise. So let's talk about the Census Bureau enumerators, also known as the counters. The counters will have badges and briefcases indicating their affiliation with the Census Bureau. So right off the bat, if someone knocks on your door, if you see someone walking down the street and they're talking about the census, you want to see if they have a badge and if they have a briefcase with the logo on it. Employees will introduce themselves as Census Bureau employees. They'll show their official government ID badge, and they'll explain the purpose of the visit. You can ask for a picture ID from them to identify their tag versus their ID, so you have a permission to do that. And the U.S. Census Bureau will never ask you to step out of your home. So that's important to note too. But there's another protection in place, which I think is really great. If you feel weary that an enumerator at your door is maybe not who they say they are, you can use this tool to verify the identity of the U.S. Census Bureau. So if you have access to the internet at home on a smartphone, you can go to this website, you can type in the person's name, and they will tell you if they are indeed a counter. If you don't have access to the internet at that moment, you can call 311 as well, and they'll be able to do this for you. So let's talk about scams, right? Because I think that's another fear that people have. It's not just trusting the government collecting this information, but it's really trusting the people that are going around and taking it. So the U.S. Census Bureau will never ask for your social security number. They'll never ask for money. They'll never ask for donations, and never about financial information, so bank or credit card numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau will never send an invitation to complete the census via email. So we talk about, the census is going to be online for the first time, and this is so exciting. You'll never be emailed a link to take that census. That's where the postcard and the invitation in the mail comes in. So if you get an email with a link to a census questionnaire, it's most likely a scam. If you suspect a scam or phishing, as it's called, you have to report it. We ask you to report it. If you see something, say something. So if something looks suspicious or your gut's telling you don't feel comfortable filling it out, report it and get it on record. There's a bunch of numbers here. I'll read out loud the 1-800 number, but there's others too if you can see the slides on the screen. 1-800-262-4236. You can also send an email to philadelphia.regional.office@census.gov. You can also call 311. They're going to be a really great partner in doing this work. And then before, when we talked about social media, if you're active online and you want to tweet at the U.S. Census Bureau and Philly Counts, you can do that as well. Yeah.
Lately, there have been people calling. I know I've got several calls saying that they were calling from the Social Security Administration, and I found out that they don't do that. Now, will there ever be a chance that someone from the census will call someone?
I am not 100% sure. I don't think so, but I don't want to go on record saying that that's a definite answer.
Somebody may say, I'm from the Census Bureau. And
yes, 100%. So none of my materials say that somebody will reach out via phone, but let's find that out for you before we leave here today. Okay. All right. So if anyone's online watching this and wants to tweet at the U.S. Census Bureau, ask that question. The question was, will somebody from the Census Bureau call you to get you to fill out the form rather than you calling them to fill out the form? So we'll get you an answer to that either way. But that was a great question. All right, so that wraps section 2. Remember, we have 6 of these, so we're trying to move along here. Section 3 is how everybody gets counted. So how does it work, right? Counting everyone in the country on a specific date is like a very big job, right? It's a logistical feat. We want to make sure that we do it right. That's why we're starting now in September, getting ready for Census Day in April 1st. As we discussed in section 1, most people will receive an invitation to participate in the census at their home, whether they're rented, owned, or it's temporary housing. Not everyone in this country is in this type of living situation, right? So we want to talk about different ways that folks who are experiencing different living situations can be counted in the most effective way possible. So there's a significant amount of people that aren't living in traditional housing units, right? So this is the breakdown of how the census is going to look at what they're calling group quarters. There's institutional, there's correctional facilities, nursing homes, and mental hospitals, and then there's non-institutional, so college dormitories, military barracks, group homes, and missions or shelters. So we want to make sure that everybody's getting counted because these are non-traditional, or I guess it's not non-traditional, but they're different than the, than if you own or rent a home. We're going to be starting in February 2020. So we're starting even earlier to make sure that everybody's counted. And so I'm going to break down how each of these groups are going to be counted and what the strategy is. So again, the goal of the Census Bureau is to take a snapshot of where people are living on April 1st, 2020. So if you have a college student at home, if you have a college student living on campus, they will be counted at their campus address, not at their home address. So if they live in Philly and they go to Temple, they'll be counted where they're living at Temple. If they live in Philly but they go to school outside of the city or the state, they'll be counted where they go to school. Philadelphia has over 18 colleges and universities in our city. The students living at Penn, Drexel, Temple, they all use our public services, right? Because they're residents here, they live here. They're riding SEPTA, they're going to the libraries, they're buying groceries, they're using our roads and our sidewalks. So we want to make sure that we include them as users of Philadelphia, and that's why we want to count them in Philadelphia, okay? Okay, so this is another group that I think is important to talk about. If someone is incarcerated, where and how are they counted? And now I'm going to share this information, and I just want to, it's not about, I'd love to have another dialogue about the logistics of this and what's, what's fair and what's not, but I'm just going to state the facts as they are. So following the same logic, as we talked about with college, if someone is incarcerated on April 1st, 2020, they will be counted through group quarters at the facility they are in on Census Day. So wherever they are incarcerated, that is where they will count, and that is where the census will identify their demographic as individuals. So that's important to know too. And then we could talk about babies, right? So babies are one of the groups most likely not to be counted. So it's important that we get all the babies counted as well. Be sure to include any newborns living in your home, even if they are still in the hospital on April 1st. They will be utilizing public services for the next 10 years, right? If there's split custody, you have to figure out where the baby will be on April 1st or which caretaker will record the child on their census data. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we want to talk about should you respond to the census if you're not an American citizen, right? So we talked about the citizen question being on there. But this is another big topic that should be discussed. So the U.S. Constitution mandates a count of all persons living in the country on a given date every 10 years. So it's not just citizens, right? The census counts all people. Citizens, non-citizen legal residents, non-citizen long-term visitors, and undocumented immigrants. So all those groups need to be accounted for in the census. If all of the undocumented immigrants living in Philadelphia, which is about 50,000 people, didn't participate in the upcoming census, we would lose out on $1 billion in federal funding over the next 10 years. So it's a significant impact. As we stated in Section 2, census data is secure and confidential, and it is protected by Title 13 in the Constitution, so it cannot be used, the census data cannot be used against you. And there are those rules and regulations that Title 13 in place for that. So I think that's another important message to spread as well. Okay. Then we also want to talk about individuals experiencing homelessness. They are counted two ways. There's service-based enumeration, so counting. People experiencing homelessness can be counted at places where they receive services, so shelters, meal centers, places like that. And then there's transitory locations. So for those that don't have a stable home environment or are experiencing homelessness, they can be counted at one of these locations. So think hotels, motels, campgrounds, and they'll be using a paper form at those locations. So again, these are groups of individuals that we want to make sure are counted, and it's going to be it's a different approach. So we wanted to make sure that everybody has that information. So as you see, there's many challenges, right? It's hard. It's hard to do this work, and that's why we're starting today. We want to make sure that everybody is counted 100%. These challenges of different populations and how they'll be counted or not, they lead to certain communities being disproportionately underrepresented in the final count. And that's a huge loss. It's a loss of services, it's a loss of funding, and it's a loss of moving Philadelphia forward. So $21,000 is lost in funding per person that's not counted over 10 years. So think about the impact on our city if a family of 5 is left out of the census, right? The impact of the city if everyone in this room and watching at home, if they were not counted, if everyone on your block wasn't counted, your neighborhood would be left out. So it definitely adds up, and it adds up quickly, and that's why we really want to avoid an undercount. For every person left out of the census, the city is trying to stretch federal dollars to meet the needs and cover everyone who actually lives in the city and needs these services, so whether they're counted or not. So the city is going to serve people, no matter what the final outcome is, but we want to make sure that we have enough funding, which will lead to enough resources to serve every individual, the best that they can be served. So that's the big topic on, who's being counted, how they're being counted, and who might be missed, and how do we avoid that.
Hey, welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and you were just watching a Census Champion video presented by Philly Counts. And we're here in the studio joined with a representative from Philly Counts, and they're the city's effort to support the next United States Census, which is happening in 2020. I'm joined by Gaby Raczka, and she is the engagement manager for Philly Counts. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vanessa. Happy to be here.
So we want to give a shout out to Jen and all the other organizers that were out there yesterday doing mass trainings in Philadelphia. There was over 100 Census Champion trainings yesterday all around the city. Is that correct?
We definitely hosted over 70. Yeah. And we trained about 100, a little over 100 trainers.
That's amazing. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's happening here in Philly. Of course, the 2020 census is a national effort. So every state, all 5 U.S. territories, there'll be people organizing to make sure everybody is counted. And I know Jen sort of talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but for folks just tuning in one more time, let's again highlight, because it's super important and it's a really, really big undertaking. But in your own words, can you tell our listeners, again, why is it so important to get counted?
So they use census data to determine a lot of things, right? The representation that we have in federal government, but also in our state government, and all the way down to our local council districts is determined by census data. It also impacts businesses when they decide where to open up new franchises, which of course has an economic impact on our city. And additionally, they determine where Philadelphia gets approximately $3 billion annually from the federal government. And that number is based on the population count from the census.
So, a couple things you should remember. This is definitely tied to funding and money. So if you care about resources for Philadelphia or wherever you might be living, it's important to get counted. It's also important to get represented, right? To know how many people of varying demographics are here in the United States. And I would also add that census data, along with the American Community Survey, is really essential information that's used by academics, researchers, people writing grants. So if you wanted to know about people in Philadelphia, their average income, how many people are in different age groups, different ethnicities, a lot of people use the census data.
It really is a snapshot of where the country is today, and people use it, as you said, for to analyze trends and access that information.
Super important. Okay, so Philly Counts 2020 has several different goals to increase the understanding about the importance of the census. We just covered that, check. Educate the public on how to participate, so we'll definitely let you know how to do that. Ensure responses from the public for a fair and accurate count, and then support filling census jobs. So let's talk about some of those things. But first, I want to highlight how Philadelphia is sort of setting a national model for how they're approaching the census. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we had some visitors from Washington over the past 2 days to come and see what we're doing here in Philadelphia. Our Census Champion program is definitely unique across the country. Cities are trying to figure out how they're going to engage folks in this process, and a lot of people are are looking to Philadelphia for that example. We did have over 2,000 volunteers come out yesterday to be trained at our trainings all across the city throughout the day. And that's a huge showing of how Philadelphia cares about our city and the impact of the census on our city.
So how is Philly Counts and the Census and other coalitions like Keystone Counts, how are they engaging with nonprofit and community partners?
Yeah, so we definitely want to make sure that our community partners have the resources that they need to be able to help us get the count out. We know that people have been working with their kind of community agencies for many years. There's a lot of trust there. And so the information coming from our nonprofit partners is more valuable even than, say, coming from Philly Counts. So we've been partnering with as many folks as possible, and we created an action fund, Philly Counts Action Fund, which I encourage folks to apply to if you are a nonprofit. Any work that you're doing around the census can be funded through these micro grants on a rolling basis, and you can apply as soon as today. And we look forward to kind of supporting that work in our communities.
So Philly Cam is also going to be helping get the word out about the census. We have over 1,000 members. And then, we sort of are excited because we can help at least get those 1,000 members counted, right, by letting everybody know this is important. But our producers who do TV shows and radio shows, I think are also essential in getting the word out and letting people know. So we'll definitely be running public service announcements and featuring guests and other important information about why it's important to get counted. So you spoke of the Census Champion training. Are there more opportunities for people to take that training if they are just finding out about it now and they say, hey, you know what? I think that's important. I'd like to learn more. What can they do?
Absolutely. So the Census Champion training is a 90-minute training. You leave there with all of the information that you need to answer the most frequently asked questions and the basics about why the census is important. We will be hosting trainings moving forward. You can contact our Philly Counts office, census@phila.gov, and we would love to host a training with your organization if that's something you would like to do. We will be posting on our website upcoming trainings as they get scheduled as well.
Now, for people who might be experiencing disabilities or have barriers with transportation or childcare, what if they can't physically come to the training? What
Absolutely.
Can they do?
Yeah, so we've partnered with a terrific new organization called Facsumo, and they are a learning platform. So you can put your content on there, and they separate it into modules and kind of add questions to the end to check people's confidence level with the information. So you can actually become a census champion by taking our Facsumo training as well.
That's awesome. So there's that specific way that you can plug in. And then you also have a Census Action Leader Summit. So the prerequisite is the Census Champion training. Tell us more about the Leader Summit.
Yeah, so on November 9th, we will be hosting a full day training where we will have the opportunity to really kind of dive deeper into some of the historically undercounted communities and what the major concerns are in those communities. We'll talk about some of the messaging that's been tested that resonates most within these communities. Basically, you can associate the historically undercounted populations with historically marginalized populations, right? So these are folks who have traditionally been underserved or ignored or held back by government agencies. And so they have a distrust. And I think right now the distrust in our country of government is even higher than it has been in previous years. So, so we encourage folks to kind of get together, talk about these challenges in our summit, and then afterwards we'll do some planning around different actions that they can actually host when it gets closer to the time for the count.
And that speaks to this whole neighbor to neighbor strategy that you're employing.
Exactly. Yeah. So we really understand that messages coming from government are limited in achieving our goal, right? We really want people to hear it from the folks that they trust, their teachers, their friends, their pastors in many cases, whoever it is that you go to, right? When you need more information about something serious or you need some help or guidance, right? We want those folks to be prepared to talk about the census and to encourage folks to participate.
That's why we're doing our part. So if you're watching or listening, take it from me, Vanessa Maria. It is very, very important to participate in the census and get counted. And hopefully you'll be hearing that message, not just from me, but from other people that you trust in the community. So you talked about those underrepresented communities, and one of the other goals, again, getting a fair and accurate count. Talk about some of the challenges, and in Philly, who might some of those communities be?
Definitely. So the challenge is that a lot of folks aren't invested. They don't know why it matters. A lot of folks don't even know what it is. And so that's a major barrier. And we also want to acknowledge that while the online response option is going to be very convenient for a lot of folks, and it'll definitely be cost saving for the Census Bureau, it'll also create barriers as well. So folks who have limited access to internet or just aren't comfortable using the internet, we want to make sure that they know that there are multiple ways to participate, right? Because while it's definitely easier for the Bureau to get it online, we want to make sure we're messaging what's easier for our community. And so definitely you can fill out the census by the phone or in person with an enumerator. If the paper form is more comfortable for you, you can do it. You can request a form, or it'll come to you in a mailer if you don't respond to the census before that. People will get 5 different reminders. So hopefully as this information is being spread and as they continue to see it, they'll be asking more questions, and hopefully the information they need will be readily available.
Who are some of these hard to reach populations? Like, how can the community help with them? Would that include people who are maybe like in transition, like living in different homes, or people in hospitals and homeless population?
Absolutely. All of those people have been historically undercounted. Communities of color are the least likely to respond to the census. Children 0 to 5 are the most forgotten about on the census, the most likely to not be counted. Folks with disabilities can, have trouble completing the form, or, I think that there's definitely a lot of, in Philadelphia, roughly a third of the population is considered undercounted historically. And so if you look at that map, it's not like one neighborhood, right? It's actually the entire city. So we really want to.
That's a lot, though. You said 1/3. Wow. So we got to do better than that in 2020.
Absolutely. I mean, every person not counted, as you heard in our training, is basically $21,000 over the next 10 years that the city will not get for public services. And, these services are everyday services, right? If they don't directly impact you, they directly impact people that you care about. We're talking about federal Pell Grants for education. We're talking about SNAP benefits and school lunches, Medicare, Medicaid, public housing, right? This information is used to determine where we build schools, hospitals, how we improve our infrastructure. It really affects basically everything.
Yeah, and in one of my previous jobs, we applied for a lot of federal grants. And when you do that, you have to select your census metro area, right? So like Philly and Camden are kind of in the same metro area. And that sort of determines how the money is given out to people, and the priority areas as well.
Absolutely.
So especially, if you're an organization that receives federal funds, it's definitely in your interest to make sure your constituency knows about the census and can easily access the information at your center. We're a public center, so, I think any organization that has people coming through the door can easily put up a sign or put out some information asking, like, have you been counted yet? Ask us how can you get counted? I think maybe we should put like stickers, people say like, I voted. So, there you go.
Ask me. I'm a census champion. Yeah. So I think that we definitely want to encourage folks to promote in any way possible. We are relying on our partners, really. We are not funding any advertising. We are not, putting resources heavily into printed materials. We really are working on that face-to-face communication, neighbor-to-neighbor strategy that you mentioned. But we are happy to talk with any group, organization, or even individual that, is passionate about this issue and wants to figure out how they can best impart this information to their community. We love to talk about organizing and how Philly Counts can support your efforts to do that.
Yeah, and I think local businesses can also be really helpful, especially restaurants and, places where a lot of people gather. You can easily put a little tabletop out there, right, with postcards. So ask us how, right? And we will let you know how you can do your part. So there's some differences between the 2010 census and the 2020 census. It's changed up a little bit. The federal government has, seemingly made it easier and the questionnaire shorter. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so folks who have done more than a couple census forms may remember a very long form. It could have taken hours and it looked kind of like War and Peace, I'm told. However,
Yeah, it was like a long, big, clunky thing, and this print was really small, and it's like multiple choice, and it can be a barrier. And people are like, "Oh, this is going to take a while."
Absolutely. So we're lucky this year there's only a short form, 9 questions, 10 minutes. Depending on how many people live in your household, it should take you about 10 minutes to fill out the census this time.
And so take us through that process. You said people would get a reminder. They're going to get like a postcard or something in the mail.
Yeah, so you're going to get 5 different mailers before an enumerator comes to your house. The first one will be a link on where to go with a unique code that'll pull up your address, right? So that'll be the first time they ask you, hey, it's time to fill out the census. Go online and fill it out. Then you'll get a reminder card again after that, roughly a week later. After that, you will get another postcard reminding you, hey, you still haven't completed the census. If you haven't done so already, please go online. And then if you haven't done that by the first 3 mailers, the 4th mailer will be a paper form. That's very important. There's misinformation out there that people will not get a paper form or that you have to request a paper form. If you have not completed the census by the 4th mailer, you will automatically get a paper form.
So the idea is to like encourage as many people to do it online first, but then if they don't do it digitally, they'll get the form mailed to them.
Exactly. And then there will be one final reminder. So 5 mailers altogether. And at that point, they will send an enumerator out to try to assist you with filling out the census.
Now, Jen may have covered this in the training, but I just want to sort of go over it again. Who fills out the census in your household? And I ask that because Philly is a city of renters, and a lot of adults and students are sharing housing, right? There might be 3 people living in 3 bedrooms and sharing a house. How do you determine head of household? Like, obviously, if you're a family, mom or dad, one of them is going to identify as head of household. But what if you're like several adults who are, in shared housing? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is about who's going to take the initiative to get it done, right?
So the roommates have to like nominate somebody.
Yeah,
Okay.
you kind of have to decide internally who's going to take up the charge.
Okay. So that means you have to, discuss it and say, okay, one person's going to fill it out for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, one, method could be the person who's making the most money in the household, right? They could be the one to fill it out. But really, I think it's whoever has the time and energy to commit to it. I mean, it is 10 minutes, but somebody's got to do it.
And for our college students who might be living in like student housing, do they get counted or do their parents count them? Because, they might spend the holidays and like all their stuff is at their parents' house. Like, how does that work?
That's a great question. And again, a common misconception. We definitely want to make sure that students are counted where they go to school. Philadelphia has about 18 colleges and universities. So that could be a really significant undercount for us if not done properly. Luckily, colleges and universities are considered group quarters. They do start counting those relatively early, and each university kind of decides how they want to do that count, whether it's providing the Census Bureau with a data file or allowing the students to kind of fill out the form per dorm on their own. But definitely they will not be counted at home if they live at school. They will be counted where they go to school.
Okay, People Power Lunch Hour is produced with the help of several interns. So college students, make sure you get counted at your universities and not at home. We also don't want to like overcount people. So let your parents know or whomever, hey, I've been counted here. Don't mark me. And as you mentioned, Jen mentioned, make sure we count those babies, right? The children.
Yes.
All of the children.
Absolutely. We want to count everyone. We want to ensure a complete and accurate count, which does include counting everyone once and only once and where they are on April 1.
Now, Philly has a large homeless population as well. What's the strategy for getting those accounted? Do you work with homeless outreach organizations?
Definitely. So Group quarters, shelters are considered group quarters, and people experiencing housing insecurity can be counted where they're receiving services, whether that's shelter, meals, clothing, anything like that. Additionally, there will be a point in time count, and that's for folks who maybe are not in shelters, who are living on the street. The city does a point in time count actually twice a year already. The Census Bureau will conduct its own point in time count, but they'll work closely with our Office of Supportive Housing to talk about best practices to do that.
Okay, so that's good because they're part of our communities as well, even if they might not have a permanent housing.
And they definitely are receiving critical services that are often funded by federal funding.
Yes, exactly. So I just want to give you an opportunity, before we tell people about the Census Action Days, like if there's any other myths or things you want to clarify, like let people know, which might be like a barrier for people who say like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, what do you think the biggest challenges for people or maybe like misinformation about that?
I definitely think data security is one of the biggest concerns right now. And that comes down to both the fact that the census is being responded to online now, and that information doesn't always feel very secure. And also due to the just the nature of government and people being concerned that their information will be shared to their detriment. So we really want to reinforce the fact that your census data is secure, confidential, and protected by the Constitution, right? That information is, there's some very stringent policies at the Census Bureau to make sure that that system is safe and secure, that nobody can get into it. Some of those things they do share with us. If you go on to their website, you can learn a little bit more about their security practices. Obviously, they can't tell us everything or it wouldn't be effective, right? So there's some public ways that they do that, and then also some ways that we don't know about. Additionally, the Title 13 law in the Constitution, which is the same law that requires participation in the census, also protects that data from everyone, right? It cannot be shared no matter what. People who are enumerators, who are kind of interacting with you and getting that information firsthand, they're sworn to a lifetime oath of secrecy, punishable by 5 years in prison and or a $250,000 fine. So as you can see, the Bureau really takes this very seriously. We've also seen the Supreme Court kind of come through and protect residents' rights and make sure that the citizenship question is not going to be included on the form. I think that should be very reassuring for folks in a time where there's a lot of distrust in government. There are still checks and balances in place that are there to protect us and protect our rights. And so I hope that people will kind of see the impact and the benefit as more important than any potential risk that they might feel that they're taking.
Yeah, especially with our immigrant population, it's super important to be counted and be represented. And I hope people are reassured now that that question is not going to be included. So before we end, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know about Census Action Days. What's going to be happening then?
Well, hopefully our census action leaders will be very excited to host. The goal is at least one action event per census track each action day. So the idea is March 21st, March 28th, and April 4th, which will be right in the middle of when you start to receive those mailers. We'll be hosting events. Our community partners, our action leaders will be hosting events, doing canvassing, phone banking, whatever it is that they are able to do, that they have the capacity and the time to do. So we want to make as much of a buzz as possible. Yesterday, hashtag Philly Counts was trending on social media, and I think that's a great start, and we really want to keep up that momentum. So folks who have completed the Census Champion training, I think many of those folks will come back and work with us again at the Action Leader Summit and then host events for us on Census Action Day. After the self-response period and kind of the buzz of the political primaries kind of comes down, we'll be hosting rapid response events in the areas that have been least responsive. So we'll really be relying on our champions and our action leaders to get that count out and to make sure that message is heard.
All right. If you're watching or listening to the People Power Lunch Hour show, you too can help with this effort. It's a massive undertaking. It requires a lot of volunteers, but there's also paid opportunities as well. In Philly, there'll be over 3,000 temporary census jobs including census counters and enumerators. And what's the website people can go to if they're interested in applying for one of these positions?
Yeah, so the Census Bureau, the Federal Census Bureau, is in charge of hiring, but Philly Counts definitely wants to promote the many opportunities. As you mentioned, 3,000 temporary positions. They're hiring on an ongoing basis. I encourage folks to apply right away. You can go to 2020census.gov/jobs and find out about the different positions available. They all come with a very competitive, I think, pay rate of, I think the enumerators make about $21 per hour. That does not affect any kind of public benefits that you are receiving as a temporary position. There will be a waiver for that. So no concerns there. And they want to make sure that they're hiring folks who are from the communities they'll be canvassing in. And they'll base that off zip code.
Yeah, so especially if you speak another language, I think this is a good opportunity because we need people to help translate the materials and serve as interpreters. Gaby Raczka is the engagement manager for Philly Counts. Thank you so much for joining us and for all the work you're doing around the census.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I just want to encourage people to follow the @US Census Bureau and @Philadelphia Gov for real-time updates on what's going on with the census here in Philadelphia. And if you decide to share this information, please be sure to use our hashtag #PhillyCounts. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the People Power Lunch Hour Show on Philly Cam TV and WPPM LP in Philadelphia. If you'd like more information about Philly Cam or the People Power Lunch Hour Show, you can visit us at phillycam.org, and you can also follow us on YouTube to see all of our past episodes. Thank you so much for watching and listening.